Welcome to this Indiana State Board of Accounts virtual training session. Today, we are focusing on the requirements of the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act, which is commonly known as FFATA. My name is Susan Gordon, and I work for the State Board of Accounts in the State Agency Advisory Services Unit. During this session, we want to let you know what the reporting requirements are under FFATA, why it is important, and how the requirements will be audited per the OMB Compliance Supplement. The goal is to provide information that will help as you review internal controls and procedures for the FFATA reporting requirement and as you plan for the next federal audit. So what is the FFATA reporting requirement? Well, under 2 CFR 170, state agencies receiving federal grants are required to report subawards of $30,000 or more to the FFATA Subaward Reporting System, which is shortened to FSRS. Of course, you know there's always an exception, and in this case, the exception we know of is HHS. Their threshold is $25,000 for most of their grants. So always make sure to look at your grant award document and applicable CFRs to verify that reporting threshold. Now, provisions in the Notice of Funding Opportunity and various grant documents will require that you have the necessary processes and systems in place to comply with the reporting requirements. So why is this important? Well, the purpose of FFATA is to provide transparency on federal spending. It's important that this information be submitted timely and accurately so that it can be reported to the public through usaspending.gov. To us, it's very important because it's a federal compliance requirement that the state has agreed to follow as a recipient of grant funds. Material noncompliance or failure to establish effective internal controls that would prevent or detect material noncompliance could result in the loss of federal funds. So compliance is very important. The federal government expects compliance with this requirement and expects Board of Accounts as the external auditor to audit federal funds for compliance with this requirement. We have references here for you to the OMB Compliance Supplement, which is a document published every year detailing the audit procedures that Board of Accounts will perform in the audit of federal funds. The FFATA report requires a lot of information from you about the subaward, including the name of the entity receiving the award, the amount of the award, the funding agency and the program number and the program source, the award title, the location of the entity, including the congressional district, the place of performance, the unique identifier of the entity and its parent, and the total compensation and names of the top 5 executives if a certain threshold is met. Now, that threshold for the total compensation and the names of the top 5 executives is shown in number 2, and that is if more than 80% of the annual gross revenues are from the federal government, and those revenues are greater than $25 million annually, and compensation information is not already available through reporting to the SEC. Now, when you make a subaward, you need to report the subaward no later than the end of the month following the month in which the obligation was made. This also applies to any amendments to your subawards as well. For example, if the obligation was made on November 7, 2021, the obligation must be reported no later than December 31, 2021. The report is to be filed at fsrs.gov. You will need a login.gov account, and you must have a unique entity ID from sam.gov. So how is this reporting requirement audited? We audit this requirement in accordance with the OMB Compliance Supplement. And here are the references related to FFATA reporting from that supplement. Now, we do have a separate training session on the compliance supplement itself, and you'll want to watch that. Here is the information on where you can find that on our website. But just to give you a little bit of background for now, each year the federal government determines which compliance requirements it wants external auditors to audit. It publishes this information in the OMB Compliance Supplement. In the supplement, there's a chart called a matrix, and the matrix shows which compliance requirements the federal government wants to have audited for that year. These designations can change from year to year. This is one reason that FAFATA has come up recently as a finding in the audit report. It's not a new requirement for you to do the FAFATA report. That has been around for years. However, the federal government has not recently required an audit of this reporting requirement until now. So you'll find that our auditors will be asking for this information where they may not have asked for it in the years past. What I'd like to do now is go through the required audit procedures so you'll know what they are. And these procedures are right out of the compliance supplement. First, we're going to gain an understanding of your internal controls, and then we're going to test them. And then we'll use the results of that testing to determine the nature, timing, and extent of further testing. Now, during this process, we're looking to see if you have written internal controls. In this case, to ensure that the FAFATA report is filed on time and with the correct information. If there's any evidence that the controls were performed, if the controls would prevent or detect material noncompliance, and whether your controls worked as they were intended. So our field examiners will need to see your written internal controls and the evidence that those controls were performed. And from there, we'll move on to our test for compliance. Now, for the test of compliance, we will perform these audit procedures, which again are directly out of the compliance supplement. First, we'll gain an understanding of the methods that you used to identify which subawards were subject to the Transparency Act. Then we'll select a sample of your subawards to see if they were properly reported. So we will be asking for your subaward agreements and any amendments. If the subaward was subject to FAFATA reporting, then in accordance with the compliance supplement, we will perform these audit procedures. First, we're going to find the award in FSRS, and that is that reporting system. We'll compare the award information reported in the system to the subaward documents, and we'll trace the reported data elements to the supporting documentation and test for mathematical accuracy if needed. So on that second point, I wanted to go through that a little bit further, and that is what exactly we're looking for when we're comparing the award information to the subaward documents. First, we're going to look to see if all the subawards were reported as required. Then we'll look into the report and specifically see if the key data elements were accurately reported and supported by documentation. And we'll talk about those key data elements on the next slide in just a couple of minutes. The third category is to make sure that the report was submitted on time. That is, the action was reported in FSRS no later than the last day of the month following the month in which the subaward amendment was made. Now, this is important. It's my understanding that there is not a good mechanism in the FSRS system to maintain the report submission date. It does not save it. So if you're going to document that the report was submitted on time, you'll need to either screenshot your submission information or find another way to document the filing of the report on time. So let's take a look at the key data elements and what those are. This chart is directly out of the compliance supplement from page 3L4. The key data elements that we must test for accuracy are the subawardee name, the DUNS number, the amount of the award, the obligation or action date, which is defined as the date the subaward amendment was signed, the date of report submission, the subaward number, the project description, and the names and compensation of highly compensated officers if those thresholds are met. So you will want to keep documentation of each data element entered into the system so that it can be verified for accuracy. So what areas of non-compliance are we going to report? Well, based on the compliance supplement, the types of non-compliance that we are required to report include whenever the subaward information was not reported at all, when the subaward information was not reported timely, when the incorrect amount was reported, or when the key data elements were not reported. So if you don't have internal controls over this reporting requirement, you will need to establish them to ensure that these areas are covered. FAFATA testing is currently required in the OMB compliance supplement. What are the most common issues we've found so far? Well, internal controls is the key area. As a grant recipient, the state is required to have internal controls in place that will prevent or detect errors in FAFATA reporting. Controls must be in place, and evidence that the controls were performed must be available for audit. The issues reported in the last audit report include reports that were not filed at all or not filed timely, or maybe there was no evidence that it was filed timely. Reports that did not include all the subawards from the previous month. Reports that did not include subaward amendments from the previous month. Grant information that was not correct, like the key data elements, and supporting documentation that was not available for audit. All of these issues are ones that you will want to look out for so that you can put controls in place to prevent or detect those errors. So what will you need for audit purposes? Well, you'll need written internal controls and tangible evidence that the controls were performed. An example of evidence might be something like an email showing that information has been reviewed, or a monthly checklist that is signed off, or whatever fits your particular controls. It is important to document the controls were completed. Second, to keep copies of subaward agreements or amendments, and documentation for every piece of information and every number you enter, including each key data element. Also, don't forget to save documentation of the submission date, as the FSRS system may not save that for you. Finally, to save audit time, keep this information in electronic files that you can pull easily to give the auditors when they come. Here are some helpful resources for you as you go through this process. First is the FSRS website, where you will enter the report. On the website, you'll find an awardee user guide, which I found to be very helpful, a video demonstration showing the various screens, frequently asked questions, information on batch reporting, and the Federal Service Desk contact information. I would highly recommend looking at the user guide if you are not familiar with the system. Of course, you can always call the Board of Accounts State Advisory Services Unit. Our primary role is to provide guidance and best practices related to applicable laws and regulations, as well as Board of Accounts Uniform Compliance Guidelines. You can reach us through our personal email addresses or through our shared inbox or by telephone. We are happy to help. Thank you for listening.